All right, guys, welcome to another Discord event at Remedy. Today's talk is going to be about the glider contest and submitting good quality glider queries, learning the do's and don'ts really of writing a query that can help you not only like write a better query for yourself, but also help you submit a query that will be quickly triaged and approved, and then you guys get paid out. Here today is Ellen, our lead community head of community,
Okay.
um, and
And Jason.
obviously I'm Jason, aka Thank You. I'm a security researcher and currently one of the triagers for the glider contest. So been reviewing a couple of your guys' queries. I see some familiar usernames on here, so I'm glad to see you guys are here to check out and learn a little bit more about some of the do's and don'ts of glider queries. So this talk is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to go through a bunch of different very simple queries. I'm going to talk about some common do's and don'ts for each one of them. And I'll talk about what you shouldn't do and what you should do. And obviously, if you guys have any questions at any time, just post it in the chat and I'll pause and answer when I have a moment. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Great. I'm assuming you guys could see my screen. So obviously I have opened up the Glider IDE. We're just going to and have a bunch of different commented out queries, and we'll just go through like each one. So the first one I want to talk about is one of the most common things I see is the use of grepping, and we're going to talk about grepping in this talk for a couple of different examples. Grepping is really just searching for text inside larger text. In this case, very often what I see is somebody will write like some sort of keyword, and it could be anything. It could be like a function call. It can be a variable name. It could be an actual number, and then they'll use the source code function, which exists for like functions, contracts, and instructions, and they'll just do a grep check. And so, like here in this code, you could see that there's a grep check against the function source code. Honestly, like this is, I think, tolerable if you're just doing bug bounty hunting, and if that's what you want to do, you're more than welcome to do that. But for the contest, we generally discourage contributors from writing glider queries that just do grepping, unless you have a very, 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 very good reason. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen a single good reason for it yet. So if you're thinking about grepping, I mean, it's great for just bug bounty hunting and doing your own thing. That can maybe get you an easy way to getting results, but it's not something I think is a really good long-term choice, and it's just not something that's going to be accepted in the glider contest. And so what we'll typically do is ask you to write or utilize the glider API library instead. So in this case, somebody is just looking to see if there's require checks, and if there are, what we could do is just add this with calling names function. And what this is going to do is this is going to look for all the functions that require that call require. And if we run it, we'll get back a couple of results that contain that. So I'll pause here and I'll just say one more thing. If you are so used to writing grep, like if you're used to just grepping for different code, and you say like, okay, I don't know actually how to use the Glider API library. We have API documentation, and this is the API documentation page, and we have a bunch of different resources for you guys. We have obviously the API section here, which is going to contain every single object that exists in the Glider API library, all the functions available to it. I just talked about using with calling names. So if you just go through the functions, because you're looking for a function, you could see and find. Actually, I'm sorry, it's not functions; it's in callables. So in Glider API library, we have different classes, and callables is a oh, interesting. It's not. I don't think it. I don't think I. Oh, here it is. And so, and we have different objects, and callables is a parent of functions. Callables can be a function or a modifier. So if you just look through this documentation, you'll eventually find this function with calling names. And so always rely on the API documentation to help you along the way. If we also have a Git, we have a Git repository of that as well. And so if you want, you can pull it. You could Git pull it and then just pass it to the AI to uh, ask the AI questions about. Well, okay, if I want to look for calling names, what can I do? And hopefully the AI is good enough to return with calling names. So avoid grepping and try to use the API library as much as you can. The next thing I have learned to is not just with like grepping functions or variable names. I also see doing hard codes of such as like division arithmetic, and so I kind of want to explain like why grepping is not a good choice for the long term. Because with grepping, when you decide to grep, um, like Glider is just going to give you text back in the source code. So if you were to just call source code, like in this example back here, we called source code against the function. Actually, let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Um, what's going to happen is it's going to return text. So then if you were to just grep any like keyword such as a division symbol, what you'll find is that it's going to also look through code comments. And obviously, code comments are not something that you want to get returned in your results. It's a false positive. It's bogus. So I want to also encourage you guys not only to look at the API documentation, but also to look at the Glider cheat sheet. So in this example, what we're doing, let me uncomment this code out real quick. In this example, we're just looking for division inside of any instruction. And so the way I did that was we have this page inside the Glider Basics course, which I recommend if you guys have just a couple hours and really want to understand how Glider works and not rely so much on AI to build things out for you, but just get a real understanding of how it works. Go to this Glider cheat sheet. And this Glider cheat sheet contains all sorts of examples you could use. One example is the get all variables used in an instruction. And so I just copied this. And what this is going to do to get all the sort of components of an instruction. An instruction is just a line of code. And then we're going to go through each expression for every component in the instruction and just check to see if a division symbol is returned. Now, this is technically grepping, but in this particular case, I've granularized the code in such a way that I know for a fact that if the component contains this division, it's a division. I may even go a step further, honestly, guys, and just do it equal. So if I run this, we'll actually get back, hopefully, some results that contain division. We may not get any results because the instruction doesn't contain it. So as we can see here, perfect. So I'm pulling up math functions that contain division. These instructions contain some sort of math operations. Okay, next one. One thing I see often is the use of try except in queries. And I think that's actually I assume it's probably because of the use of AI. And what try except allows us to do is to call a function that either like will raise an error or and unfortunately it would be an invalid function. And it allows us to sort of hide the error in glider queries. And in general, like I kind of really want to push against anyone using try except, because if it feels like a code smell to me, it feels like you're doing something that doesn't really or should exist. And so in that case, what I recommend you guys to do is just again refer to the Glider API library and make sure that your code is actually working as intended. And often, actually, in most cases, I see try excepts and they just aren't needed. You could just remove them. So in this particular case, we just have this invalid function, and this try except is going to always fail because this invalid function exists. I think like my assumption again is that AI wrote the code and is using this try except because maybe the user prompted AI and said, "Hey, this function is not working. What can I do?" And it gave you back a try except. So if I see it, I'm probably going to ask you guys to get rid of it. Ellen, do we have any questions, by the way? I'll just do a quick pause. I can't see the chat
No
right now.
questions
So,
so far in the chat. I'm
okay.
monitoring.
Another thing I think is really helpful uh, and required for every single query that you submit in the glider contest is that contracts should always be, we should always query against the main contracts. This is just a requirement that we set in place. In this particular case, we're just querying for contracts. And what we could do if we want to look for the main contracts is we could just add this function right here. And what this is going to do is it's going to look for only the main contracts. And so the main contracts are, they are literally the main contract that is uh, deployed on that particular address. Obviously every contract address can have multiple contracts, but there's only one main contract. So that's what this query is doing. If we were looking for functions, what we could do is we could actually just do a filter, and what we'll do is we'll call the contract, and then we could use the is main function, and that will also return to us functions that exist in the main contract. If you want to do it that way, all of this again is available in our API library. If you just go look at the function section, and you can find the actually it'd be again, as I mentioned earlier, function is a subclass of the callable class. So what we could do is just get the contract, and then in this case, I'm just going to go into the contract section, and then I'll see, okay, I could see if there's a is main. Um, so keep that in mind. Another thing that I think is something I see quite often is when we typically run queries in Glider, we're going to always set a limitation on the exec, which makes perfect sense. Really recommend you guys do that, because if you set this to unlimited, it runs forever and you're just going to be sitting and waiting. And typically I say just keep it a small value, or use custom scope, because custom scope will allow you to iterate quicker over your query versus running it against mainnet, because it's just faster. And but in this case, like when you actually submit the query, we actually ask you to remove that, because in our backend system will appropriately handle the execution. So we just ask if there's any executes in your query, just make sure it's empty. There's no arguments passed to it. I actually want to add something else to this too. It's something I've noticed with with queries is that sometimes I actually see people set limits when it's unnecessary. Um, so in this case, like we're just iterating through functions name transfer. I'm just going to add a filter, and I'm going to iterate over the instructions. And so that typically, like that what happens is people will actually add a limit on the instructions, and, like personally I don't think that's actually needed. You actually just want to iterate through all of the instructions for the function, and on top of that, I think some of it is actually a performance. Like some people who are writing these queries think, okay, well, if I set a limit to it, that will help the performance of it. And I think, like personally, in this particular case, I don't think you even need to set a limit on this exec. Obviously, you need to set a limit here when you're looking for the initial functions, because that's going to look for every single function inside the entire chain, and that's millions of functions. So you don't want that. But in this case, like you're drawing upon 100 functions. I think the performance is negligible where you're setting how many instructions you're actually going to be you're returning. So just keep that in mind too. Another thing that I see is that, again, this is sort of related to hard coding, is people will look for something like message sender or message value. And what they'll do is they'll grep the function source code. And so, as I mentioned earlier, like try to avoid grep as much as you can. And there's a lot of very interesting functions, glider API functions you could use to look for things that in grepping you're usually uh, that can replace grepping. So in this particular case, since we're looking for message value, we have this feature, and I think I've probably posted when I triage several queries this same like function. So I want to mention it specifically. It's called with globals. With globals is phenomenal. It allows us to look for things, basically like global variables such as message sender, message value, block timestamp. And if you go to the API documentation, and let's just go to, I think it's going to be in callables. And if you go to the with global section, you're going to find a bunch of information on the different global filters. I think it may not, it could be in here. Let me double check. Now, that full list of global filters is being added, I think, either today or tomorrow. Actually, we have a link to it. Okay, here it is. So these are all the global filters we have access to. Um, Again, this is just me pointing out that you don't have to grep something. There are plenty glider API functions available to you to use to find what you're looking for, such as message value. Ellen, do we have any questions right now?
Um, Thank you for doing this question. Without limiting exec, is there an effective way to speed up execution time when doing complex iterations? I have a complex one that keeps hitting execution limit.
Yeah, that's tough. Not really. So here, I guess it depends. Okay, I don't know all the details, but there's two ways I could think about this. First, if you're developing the query, if you're like not really sure it's working and you're just kind of still trying to improve it, I would just use create a custom scope contract. Uh, or custom scope. And what you want to do is you say, okay, well, maybe I don't have a vulnerable contract that's deployed. You could deploy your own. You could deploy your own to Sepolia. It's free. And if you guys, if you want, you can message me and I can give you details on how to deploy to Sepolia. Create a contract that has that vulnerability. Deploy it to Sepolia. You could then add a custom scope for Sepolia, and then you could run your query against that. That's the first thing. Now, if let's say the query actually does work, it could find the vulnerabilities, but it's just taking a long time. Unfortunately, the best. I mean, there's a couple of minor things that I would think about. First, we have this feature called like a performance stats. So if you just go to the top right, there's a performance button, and you could actually go to the profile stats, and you could see where everything's or like each where the breakdown of the performance of the query is going. So in this case, so this is a weird quirk of the performance profiler, is that in this case it's telling me this took 4.5 seconds, and the rest of these are zeros. And the reason why that is because we've chained these calls together. So it's not honestly, it's not very good for me. But what I could do is I could break this into different variables. And if I do that, so actually let me look for maybe we don't have, trying to look for a good example here. Let's just say okay, let's do this. So I have this query, and I'm going to close this. I'm just going to rerun it real quick, and we'll actually reduce this. So if you have a very highly complex query, you could run this profiler and try to understand where those bottlenecks are. And understanding those bottlenecks, I think, is like the first step to figuring out where everything is, where you're hanging up in terms of your query. So let's say funcs. Okay, so I've created this variable called funcs, and I'm just going to apply a filter on it. And if I write my query this way, then I will be able to. I know I'm grepping here, guys. Just bear with me. Just showing this off. Don't submit this as a query, please don't. If we run this query again, and then once it's complete, we'll check the performance. It's actually going to give us the itemized breakdown of what's happening. So like 32% of the time went to actually looking for the functions, and then 68% of the time went over to doing this filter, iterating through each function, and then doing a grep against the source code. So using this profiler can help greatly understanding to like reduce the complexity of your query. Another thing is obviously just reduce exec, like your main exec. So in this case, if I actually reduce this like to 10, right, and we run it again, we're going to see a much lower set of results. That's difficult too because you got to scan against the entire blockchain. So I would also you may have to reduce exec. It's not ideal because it just means you're going to have to run the query more, and like that kind of sucks right now because you're running it through the Glider IDE. I will say we're working on API access. Once we have API access, I think it'll be much easier for you guys to automate this and not have to manually go through the Glider IDE, wait for results to come back, and then update the exec and then run again. Obviously, if you don't know already, we could do batching. So if you ran through the first 10 results and you want to get the next 10, you could just update it like this. A final thing that I will say, complex queries often check for many things. And sometimes it may be easier for you to, this is not, this may be even acceptable for a query submitted to the Glider contest. It doesn't have to prove the vulnerability. It just has to show that there's a great likelihood of that occurring. Um, it I don't think a Glider query has to have what I would call an end-to-end test. It doesn't have to check for every little detail. So if you go through your query and you check the performance and you're seeing certain like functions that are taking a long time, you may want to consider whether that's necessary or not. And obviously, you're probably going to be the best person to do that because you're the one that's working through the query the most, and you understand the bug that you're looking for, and you've looked through all these results. But if you still have questions further, just please don't hesitate to ask us. I'm more than happy to help. I know I'm sorry that's a very long-winded answer, but I think that's really important for anybody who's working on Glider and is facing these sort of complex queries that take a long time. I mean, there are a lot of ways we could mitigate that and improve that. And so if you have specific questions about your query, just you could ping us in Discord channel, or you could, if it's private and you don't want others to share, you could also DM to us, DM to me, and we could kind of give you some further clues on
Or
maybe how
just
to improve
open
that
a
performance.
support ticket that also provides.
Sure, yeah, that too.
We have another question. Now let's address this one and then come back to Nelson Peter. So if I'm updating a query and I know it will catch exploits, it could be submit without new JSON results. It could be, I guess, it could be submitted without new JSON results. Does it?
Well, okay. I guess I'm trying to understand the full question. I'll interpret it several different ways. The first way I would say is if you write a query and you get results, then obviously when you submit the query, you'll be able to select the results that you want us to look at as a triager. So you can do it that way. Let's say you update the query. You've already submitted it and you've updated the query and you have new results. Then what you could do is just pass us the contract address and the chain that the contract is on. and because maybe you're doing it from custom scope and maybe not necessarily from mainnet, and you could update it in the contribution. You can send just a message in the contribution page for your query contribution page, and we'll also take a look at that and take that into consideration too. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, just if you could rephrase it, that'd be helpful too.
I'll ask the other question. What's the best way to study the Glider API? Do you have any specific sections or areas to focus, or to write better gliders?
So I think looking at glider queries, existing glider queries, is very helpful. I think it's going to give you an understanding of how looking for certain bugs work. Obviously, I think taking the glider's basics course right here on this like section, I think that's very helpful. I think it's probably take most people 2 to 4 hours, maybe a little bit longer to go through it. I would just okay. Let's say you know instructions. If you know what instructions are, what functions are, and what contracts are, I would go straight to the API. And what I would do is I would open up this page, functions or contracts or instructions, and start just looking at each available Glider API function that's available to you. Look at the query example, run the query example, look at the results, and just start playing with the code. I think that's probably the best way to go about it. So again, if you have no familiarity with it, you can obviously take the Glider Basics course. That's very helpful. Or you could look at existing Glider queries. We have some. If you go open up the side panel on the left side, you can go to Hexens, and we have a list of various queries that are simple, intermediate, advanced. And let's say you go through that, you kind of understand that, you understand what functions, instructions, and contracts are. Then just go to the API and just start going through each of these sections to understand how it works, to see what's available to you. And then that's really the best way. If you have a bug in mind and you come across a query that like, hey, maybe I could find this bug with using just this query that exists in the API documentation, do that. And that's really how you're going to learn.
Getting back to the question of K42. So I am updating one given node made by triage ND. So if I submit it without JSON results as it is reaching execution limit in the IDE on mainnet, is that acceptable? If I know it will catch exploits without the execution limit.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's okay. I mean, again, like I think I mentioned this earlier, we don't actually want you to put exact limits on it. Like on the back end, we'll be able to sort of handle that. Obviously, we may ask because it hits limits. We may ask for a better understanding of where the performance is or like where the performance bottlenecks are, and we may ask for improvements on that. But I think I personally, I would have to look at the code to understand it a little bit more. And if you actually DM it to me, I'll take a look at it. And I'll talk to our other triagers about that. It's a good question. I think it's okay, but I think there is also probably a possibility we may just ask for some improvements on the performance. I'm sure there's ways we can improve it.
I don't see any more questions in the chat.
Okay, cool. All right, so this next. Okay, so here's a common gotcha that I see many people do is not using recursive. So what recursive means in the context of Glider is, let's say you have a solidity function and it calls other functions. With Glider, we could look at this function and we could look through the instructions of that function. And this is what this query does right here. We're just going to go through 10 functions and we're going to get every single instruction that exists in that function. The problem is that if that function also makes other calls to other contracts, we're not counting that. this query does not count for that. And so what we could do is we could call something called recursive. And what recursive does is it's going to dig not only into the instructions of the main function you're looking at, it's also going to look at the calls made to other functions and count those instructions too. So it's a very powerful glider API function in that matter. It's going to get you everything, and that's very important. Like imagine, for example, you have a bug you're looking for, and that bug is checking to see if an amount value is greater than 100. Well, I would want to look through every single instruction that is called when I call, let's say a swap function, right? Like I want to know every single instruction that exists, and I want to be able to check through it to make sure that amount is never evaluated, is never validated. So you can never do that with just calling instructions.exec, but you can do that with instructions recursive. So that's just something I think very important for you guys to be aware of. And it's not just we do recursive for instructions; we also have other recursive functions that are that I recommend you check through. If you go to the API, you could look through different sections. Like, okay, here's an example. We have caller functions recursive. So what this will do is, given a like series of functions, we could find out who called those functions. So that works recursively. So it's not just looking at the caller functions, it's also looking at the grandparent caller functions and the great grandparent caller functions, etc. So always look through the API to see if there's a recursive equivalent and use it, because most likely not, we're going to ask you to add that in there. And it's also very helpful because it will improve your true positive rate, and it will reduce false positives as well. Another common gotcha is memory limits. I know you guys hit that sometimes. I think I briefly mentioned this before, but my best recommendation is just to limit the exec. And so if you do like if we did this right here, this is going to take a very long time. But if you just reduce it, by magnitudes, you'll find that the uh, query has a much greater chance of not hitting those memory limits. And sometimes that actually fluctuates too. I read in a query recently where what I found is that sometimes the query will execute, sometimes it won't, and it'll hit a memory limit. And the reason is because in Glider, you're taking a sample of contracts and you're parsing it with the query engine. And sometimes some contracts are much more complex than others. So for any given random sample size, you may find that the performance hits sort of like a very complex contract. It takes a lot more memory than usual, and that may fail. So just kind of be aware of that. You could think that like, okay, this query runs well at 100, if just looking at 100 functions, but then down the road you may run it and just you may hit that limit. This is kind of rare to see, but it does happen. And especially once we come out with the Glider API and you guys start automating this, I think you may find that. So just kind of be aware of that when you're designing whatever your favorite API tool is to run your Glider queries. Again, this is sort of like the same thing, just reduce the memory limits. You want to reduce the exec as much as you can. One thing I have noticed is sometimes calling recursive functions is very expensive, and that could kind of cost you some. So recursive is a double-edged sword. I think there's been some improvements on that, but that still exists. Sometimes there's one thing I've noticed is like when you call instructions with callee names, that is also a big one that I noticed that has some performance. I don't want to say bottleneck, but it's just very heavy on performance. So just be cautious of that. And if you want ways to mitigate that, just come talk to me, and I'm sure we can figure out a workaround for it. So this is again another example I've seen often is a lot of people will write and check for authorization, And what they'll do is they'll go through the modifiers and they'll say, okay, I'm going to grep for modifiers named only. So this is what this query does. It's super popular. I've seen it a million times. This is, again, it's not only discouraged because we're grepping the code, but it's also a bit disingenuous to assume that a only modifier is a authorization check. You could have a modifier named only EOA, and that means that anyone, really, any EOA address can call that particular function using that modifier. And so what happens if you decide to grep and you decide to do this sort of authorization checks via grepping, what you find is that you'll increase uh, your you'll introduce potential false negatives, because you're making this assumption that this term used by developers is strictly related to what you've commonly seen. Like, most often we'll see only owner as a modifier name, and we'll check for that. We'll just say, okay, only owner. And then maybe we'll do a only admin and then that sort of thinking is, I think it's restrictive and how we should understand Glider. The reality is, like, to solve this is we could use the Glider API library. And one thing I'm working on in this particular case is a snippet of code that we could use that could actually check modifiers to see if message sender is validated. That's probably the real way we should approach this, and not necessarily just thinking about, like, okay, well, a function is named this, so it must do this. Well, there's functions that have alternative meanings and alternative phrases, different semantics that greatly impact our how we should write our glider query. It's not about naming; it's about what does that function actually do. So hopefully, in the case of authorization, at least, like, the snippet of code I'm working on, probably going to release it today, if not tomorrow. It's been taking a little bit of time to get going. I think that's going to help a lot of people here. I see it quite often. We're looking for stuff that doesn't have authorization checks or has authorization checks. So just be on the lookout for that. We'll post it in Discord once it's done. Um, So another thing is specialization, or just commonality, common bugs. We do, like, accept common bugs. It's more than welcome to write it. Sometimes though, I've seen queries that I think could be specialized that can also increase the true positive rate. It can help you find more serious vulnerabilities, and in turn get you a higher score, get paid more money, and hopefully find, valid bug bounties that you could submit. So in this case, like, we're just looking to see if self-destruct is called, which is cool. But what self-destruct, even just put aside the fact that self-destruct is sort of been muted in one of the recent EVM upgrades. Um, this query, I think, can be improved to look for something specific within self-destruct. And right now, it's just checking for calls to self-destruct, which is, I think it's okay, but there's ways to improve this. And so I encourage everybody, when they're writing queries, to think about that. Think about specializing your query if it's not already specialized, because it actually stands out, and uh, I think increases your chances of finding vulnerabilities. Right now, if you ran this, at least this query in particular, it's so common, you're going to get tens of thousands of results. I don't think anybody wants that. Something I see is people will write over a query that looks for an overly complex vulnerability. And I used to do this a lot when I first started writing glider queries. What I have found is that it's sometimes easier to write a query that looks for clues and not necessarily meets all the requirements for your particular vulnerability. Um, I think when you try to do a checklist and you cover every single use case, your query becomes complex and it requires a lot of energy and time, not only to work on it, but also to run it against the Glider IDE, because the more complex the query gets, the greater the likelihood that you'll be able to review less results at any given time. So think about the query that you're writing. Think about what the hard requirements of that vulnerability are, and work on that. Don't get too strung up yet on edge cases when you're first writing a query. Again, like, we're not going to expect a complete end-to-end test. We don't expect 100% true positive rate. So if you come up with a query that gives us really good solid clue as to uh, the potential vulnerability you're looking for, and you got hits, I mean, that's a good query. If you write a very overly complex query, I think that's good. I think it's interesting, but you're going to have to deal with some downsides of that. And so just be aware of that. Do we have any more questions, Ellen?
I wouldn't say a question, but K42 writes that he found one contract with 23 billion TVL with Glider, which is crazy, but pretty sure that it's false positive, but he will review to be sure.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's really nice to find to find contracts that are either like from very popular protocols or they have high TVL. That's pretty sweet. It's always nice when you see that. Another thing I see is, especially with the math stuff, is I'll see people will write something like this, where they have in their head an idea of a particular formula they're looking for, and they'll just hard code it. And I'm not going to talk about grepping. I already said my piece about it, but I want you, whenever you're thinking about doing something like this, I really want you to consider not just like semantically how this works, but also what's actually like going on here. So, and what I mean by that is, like, if we look at total supply and balance, probably the bug you're looking for has to do something with the manipulation of a total supply of tokens and also a balance of a particular contract. I think it'd be much more interesting if you were to say, like, okay, well, instead of doing this, maybe we could do something like, we'll call the what we'll do is we'll call the function callee names, and we'll see if there is a total supply function called in that function. If that's the case, then okay, we know that there is a total supply called. Balance probably comes from balance of, so maybe we could do this too. And so what this will do is, it's not exactly the same as this original grep, but we've at least identified ways to determine if a function contains a total supply call and if it also contains a balance of call. Or balance of may actually be like a mapping. So maybe we want to think about that too, but just put that aside. Maybe the next thing after that is to say, okay, we have total supply, we have balance of. Now we need to go look at this division. Well, I think way back up here, I had an example of us looking for a division. It's right here. So maybe I'll just copy that, and then I'll update this to be, just to iterate through all of the function instructions recursively, and just to see if there's a division. So this is like, obviously this is not going to give us a perfect true positive rate. I'm sure there's many examples where division is not used in these two variables, but it gives us a start. And so maybe further on, what we'll want to do is go through the instructions and see, okay, is there actually a case where there's a total supply variable, there's a division operation, and then there's a balance? And there's a lot of ways we could do that. But I think this is much more interesting in my mind than just grepping. This is not perfect. I still probably would expect more work being done to identify this particular formula. But this is just utilizing the Glider API, and it's going to give us, I think, a pretty good high positive rate. It also allows us to avoid semantics, because what if the developer, instead of doing this, where they wrote it just like this, what if they just removed the spaces? So now we're going to have to go through and make up all these variations of this formula, and it's just no good. So again, utilize the Glider API library. I have two more. I'll quickly go through them. This one, I see this sometimes. Print is really great for debugging. If we run this query right now, let me just comment this out. If we run this query, we'll get some printed information for the first function found. We got that right here, which is really nice. But we don't want that in our Glider query submitted on the Glider contest. So if you have prints, just remove them. The final one is something I've noticed a few times. Glider uses a sandbox version of Python, and so we don't have most Python libraries available to us, such as re. So if you use something like this, in this case, we're just looking for functions, and we're using the research re library to search for only. If we run this, I don't think we'll actually get back any results. And that's just because the re library doesn't exist to us. So I would almost assume that if there's a Python library that is native in Python, it's probably not available in Glider. Within doubt, just ask us, and we could answer for you. But you will have to be required to just use the Glider API library and some of the more basic, very, very, very basic Python native functions available to you. Ellen, do we have any more questions?
No questions in the chat.
Great. So that's it, guys. I'm going to share with you the document I shared. I'll post that actually in the Glider. I'll post that in general for you guys to take a look at and check out, so you could review all my notes. If you guys have any more questions, I'll give you guys a minute or two. But otherwise, if you're new to Glider and you haven't used it before, go to the Glider IDE, check out the examples, check out our documentation. If you're not familiar with the Glider contest, go check us out at r.xyz. And then there is a Glider query DB. Actually, we'll just post it also in the chat, the links to all this. But if you just go to r.xyz, go under Glider, and click on the Glider Query DB, you'll find all our information about our $50,000 Glider contest. It ends December 31st. As always, I'm here for any help. Ellen is too. For any questions you guys have, don't hesitate to ask on Discord or DM us. We're always here to help. I don't think there's any more questions. So, Ellen, did I miss anything?
All useful links are in the Glider resources chat, so you can at any time open the chat and find all the links I assume that you will need around Glider and the Glider contest. So I left the channel linked in the chat of the event, so you can check it out too. We'll have this video posted on YouTube, so if you missed any part of it, you will be able to go through and check out, as well as check out our latest talk recordings. That's it from my side.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.